Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to US Election Hub, and today we're going to be talking about the 2020 Democratic primary and discussing the role African Americans play in determining the Democratic nominee for president. And spoiler, they play a big role in determining the president. Let's just take a look at the 2016 Democratic primaries. One thing you will notice is Hillary Clinton won the nomination, particularly because she had the support of the African American community. Just take a look at this. She won the Deep South in her bid for the presidency. She even won Ohio. She won some of these northeastern states. I mean, she did very well, and this is the reason she was able to clinch the nomination. I mean, look at Bernie Sanders. He did well in a lot of low population states, and, he struggled with the African American community in 2016. And while less African Americans are in the Rust Belt, and maybe that they play a slightly less role, nonetheless, they still are important because Barack Obama was able to win the Rust Belt by big margins, not just because of the white working class, but because of high African American turnout. So let's look at this poll conducted by USA Today and Suffolk University. And this basically is polling different candidates by white and black voters and seeing which candidate has the most support for basically these two races. And so if we look for Joe Biden wins nearly half of white liberals, or white Democrats is a better term, and Joe Biden wins a whopping 2/3, 66% of African Americans. And that is very interesting. Take a look at Beto O'Rourke, who's been polling fairly decent recently. He does better with Hispanics, but take a look with African Americans. He is not polling well compared to a lot of these other candidates on this list, and that is problematic for someone like Beto O'Rourke. They say Beto O'Rourke could defeat Donald Trump. Well, you better think twice if he can even win the nomination without the African American support. Bernie Sanders in 2016 did not have as much African American support, but he does have a little more now. But if you notice, Bernie Sanders has less white Democratic support, and so that's very interesting. Cory Booker is African American himself. He has slightly better African American support. Kamala Harris is part African American, so she has slightly more African American support. Their white vote totals are kind of low. Elizabeth Warren has a much higher share of the African American vote. Michael Bloomberg does about even with both white and black. Amy Klobuchar struggles with African Americans, but she does better in the Rust Belt, especially with white Democrats. And look at this, even Hilary Clinton in this poll, she gets 38% of support from African Americans. Not even white Americans can support her by 10%. And I think that's the important thing we need to distinguish here. That Hillary Clinton won the nomination in 2016 by numerous factors, but one of the biggest ones was that she had African American support. And if you deny this fact, then you will understand that no progressive or no candidate will ever win the nomination without African Americans. And this is by virtue how African Americans are integrated into the Democratic Party. For instance, let's go ahead and take a look at the electoral map right here. And let's do a pretend Democratic primary. So let's just put Joe Biden over here and just pretend this Republican is another Democrat. Let's just say the Republican is, let me bring up the chart right here. Let's pretend he's Beto O'Rourke, who struggles with African American voters. So, Joe Biden versus Beto O'Rourke. Well, let's take a look at states with high African American populations. Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, Maryland, South Carolina. All of these are mainly Republican states, but in the Democratic primary, the African Americans are Democratic voters. And so, if you look at a lot of these states, Hillary Clinton won them. In fact, she won the Deep South. She literally won all these states right here, and so that's very impressive and shows the level of African American support you need to clinch the Democratic nomination. So let's just say that Joe Biden essentially wins almost every state that Hillary Clinton won, and all those states generally are with high African American populations. We'll give him Maryland, high African American, D.C., will give him Connecticut and Massachusetts. Then we go into the Deep South. All these states right here are going to be Democratic because Joe Biden is likely to win them if he were the leading Democratic candidate. As you can see, these states also have high African American populations. Let's go ahead and continue filling this out, just making sure I'm correct on these. He would likely win Illinois as well. What other state would it be? I think Ohio would be an interesting one. Ohio and New York would definitely be competitive. I also think he could pull off a victory in California. Now, I think that would just be enough to clinch the nomination. Say the opponent was Beto O'Rourke, he would probably win Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. He'd probably do better than Bernie Sanders did in 2016, but Beto O'Rourke would still fall behind because of the lack of African American support. And let me just take a look at something. Okay, so these states would go to Beto O'Rourke for if he was the other Democratic competing candidate. Let's just take a look at something else. New Jersey or Pennsylvania. Interesting. I think Joe Biden could win Pennsylvania. I'll give New Jersey to Beto, and then these remaining states would be Beto O'Rourke. And so just take a look at that. I mean, that's a very interesting map right there. But because Joe Biden has the African American support, he will clinch the nomination. And he will do it in a lot of these bigger states. Florida, California. California has less African Americans, but it is, I would say, more moderate in electing Democratic nominees. Illinois, Virginia, Florida, and New York are the big ones, even Ohio. And these, I think, are big factors in determining who wins the Democratic nomination. And so, thank you guys so much for watching. In this video, I just wanted to explain the importance of the African American vote. That if you're a progressive and you're really fighting for class issues, the one biggest thing you fail to realize is if you do that, you risk alienating a lot of African Americans who care about race issues. And particularly, that is one of the biggest ways to win. Barack Obama had impressive African American turnout, and if you're going to shun African Americans in the Democratic Party, then you are going to lose the election. One more thing to note is that African Americans are very diverse in their ideology. Polls have been done, and what they show is this. African Americans are overwhelmingly registered Democrats. And so if they're overwhelmingly registered Democrats, their ideological views are going to be very diverse. In fact, about a third of African Americans ideologically are conservative. Another third of African Americans are ideologically moderate, and another third are ideologically liberal. And so that leaves 2/3 of African Americans essentially being moderate Democrats, some being conservative Democrats. And when you have all African Americans in one party with differing ideologies, what you will find is that they are more likely to support moderate candidates, and they're going to support candidates who reach out to the African American community, and sometimes it's even candidates who share the same skin color. And one thing I will say about that is Joe Biden is not black. I mean, clearly, just take a look at him. But he has the credentials from being the vice president of the Obama administration, and he has generally treated African Americans with respect, and he has the name recognition. So I think it's pretty obvious that moderate and conservative African Americans are supporting him. 66%, that is impressive. And I would say if Joe Biden announced his presidency tomorrow, I would say that he would really have a big chance of winning the nomination. I mean, for hell, Hilary Clinton could even win the nomination again, potentially, by getting the 38% of African American support. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and see you guys next time.